Well, good morning, everyone. Guten Tag, bonjour, buenos dias. My name is Sean Morris. I'm a Principal Policy Officer for Manchester City Council, and I'm the Secretary of the UK and Ireland Nuclear Free Local Authorities, or NFLA, and the UK and Ireland chapter of Mayors for Peace. NFLA is also a member of the ICAN coalition as well. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this joint webinar today, which is the first main meeting of the European Mayors for Peace chapter and is being held in association with NFLA and ICAN. This webinar has been organised to support the work of Mayors for Peace, to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the NFLA, and to welcome the coming into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or the TPNW, for which ICAN have played a very important role in lobbying for. This webinar is looking at the peace, security and disarmament debate within Europe over the next decade. We want to consider how this debate will particularly change in the next 12 months as the TPNW enters force. We also have the delayed review conference of Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty next year. We have a new US president coming into election in January, and we're still in the midst of a global health pandemic, with all that that means for peace and security. We particularly want to focus on the role of local authorities, our towns, our cities, our county local governments, and how they can promote a more peaceful world at the local, national and global levels. You'll hear today from prominent mayors, leading academics and senior staff from ICAN on such matters. We have a lot of speakers today and a tight schedule, so I'll be starting the meeting formally. But just a few important logistical matters for this meeting. This meeting is being held on Zoom and is also streamed live on YouTube. It will be recorded so that people outside Europe can also watch it later. We'll predominantly be using English, but some speakers will be speaking in Spanish or French. And you should see at the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom YouTube screen the opportunity to pick your language of choice, so that you will hear speakers in your own language via a translator. We also ask you to use the chat function of Zoom if you wish to make any comments or put a question forward. We have a number of staff who will collate them, and some will be picked in the two short panel discussions and for also answering after the meeting. We have over 200 people on this call from around Europe and beyond, so please be patient with us. We hope there will not be too many technical issues, but it is always possible. That is why we're trying to do the call in both Zoom and YouTube, in case you have any issues with the format. So, without further ado, I'd like to start the webinar with some introductory comments. We're very pleased that the President of Mayors for Peace, the Mayor of Hiroshima, Kazumi, has provided us with a video message. Due to the time difference, he can't be here today. We're very delighted he can welcome us formally to this meeting. So please hear from Mayor Matsuda.
Ladies and gentlemen, greetings from Hiroshima. I'm Kazumi, the Mayor of Hiroshima and also the President of Mayors for Peace. It is a great pleasure to offer a few words on the occasion of this joint webinar between the Mayors for Peace European Chapter, NFLA and ICAN. On October 24th, the number of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons reached 15, ensuring that the treaty will come into force next January. The treaty's entry into force is a critical milestone in working toward nuclear weapons abolition. This achievement was only made possible thanks to the Hibakusha and many other like-minded people's efforts. However, there still exists more than 13,000 nuclear warheads in the world, and the nuclear disarmament is now stagnant. nuclear-armed states and their allies under the nuclear umbrella continue to be opposed to the treaty. Our forthcoming challenges are to make the treaty a comprehensive and fully effective, legally binding instrument, including verification and other strong confidence-building measures. Policymakers of the nuclear-armed states and their allies believe in nuclear deterrence in order to secure their country's safety, and so their opposition to the treaty continues. However, once a nuclear weapon is used, it is clear that not only will their citizens' safety never be secured, our whole planet Earth will be devastated. That is why nuclear deterrence is meaningless. It is always innocent civilians who will be harmed by nuclear weapons. I therefore think it is important for us in civil society to help create an environment that urges policymakers to change their policies to pursue the world we need. In this regard, it is truly meaningful that during this webinar, you will think together how you can make Europe more peaceful, safer, and free from nuclear weapons, and deepen solidarity in civil society. I would like to express my deepest respect for this initiative. Mayors for Peace, of which I serve as president, is determined to work in solidarity with these approximately 8,000 member cities in 165 countries and regions around the world to help create an environment in which policymakers can take decisive leadership for policy changes and build up momentum for creating peace. Mayors for Peace has more than 3,000 member cities in Europe, whose people I sincerely hope will strive together with us for the realization of everlasting world peace. In closing, I extend my best wishes for the great success of this webinar and increased European public support for a world free from nuclear weapons.
So we after giving thanks to Mayor Matsue, just over a year ago, European lead cities and mayors of peace came together in Hanover City Hall to establish a European Mayors of Peace chapter to focus and widen our work across Europe. I'm very pleased to introduce Mayor Josep Mayoral Intigas. Mayor Mayoral has been a mayor of Granollers since 2004 in the province of Barcelona and been a vice president of Mayors of Peace since 2009. Last year, he was appointed as the first chair of the European Mayors of Peace chapter, and he will formally welcome you to this webinar.
Sí, muy buenos días a todos y a todas. Estamos encantados de compartir esta mañana. Nos hubiese gustado que lo hubiésemos compartido físicamente, ¿no? Hoy, desgraciadamente, esto es imposible. Como explicaba Sean, hace un año aproximadamente constituimos Alcaldes por la Paz, sección europea, de la mano del alcalde de Hiroshima y de Nagasaki, una sección europea que tiene unos objetivos muy claros. Y el esencial es fortalecer el municipalismo por la paz en Europa y hacerlo de la mano de la sociedad civil. Por eso, nuestro plan de trabajo, lo primero que hicimos fue buscar el enlace con ICAN para reforzar su campaña para conseguir que los estados europeos firmaran el Tratado de Prohibición de Armas Nucleares. Desgraciadamente, en este momento, solamente hay 5 estados europeos que hayan firmado este tratado. Es necesario poner a la vieja Europa en el espejo y recordarle que tiene armas nucleares en muchos rincones y que muy cerca de nuestra casa hay un arma nuclear. Se habla poco de ello en Europa. Era para nosotros imprescindible poner encima de la mesa la reflexión, también con la academia, de cuál era la realidad de las armas nucleares en Europa. Acompañamos decididamente a ICAN en este camino y teníamos una iniciativa espléndida para el 2020. Era un año fundamental, 75 años del final de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, 75 años del final del Holocausto, 75 años de la bomba atómica de Hiroshima y Nagasaki. Era un año importantísimo para lanzar esta campaña contra las armas nucleares. Por eso acompañamos a ICAN en París y en Barcelona. Fue en el mes de febrero. En el mes de marzo el virus terminó este camino y nos hizo volver a nuestras casas, encerrar a nuestras casas. Nos hizo fijar la mirada en la gestión de la pandemia y en estar al lado de nuestros ciudadanos que sufrían en los hospitales o bien con los efectos económicos de esta dura crisis que no solamente es sanitaria, sino que es económica y social. Tenemos el riesgo de quedarnos atrapados por el día a día, pero los alcaldes, las alcaldesas, tenemos la obligación de proponer a la ciudadanía una mirada más larga. Por eso solamente saldremos en buenas condiciones de esta crisis que vivimos apostando hacia el futuro, no renunciando a nuestros principios básicos, a nuestro compromiso por la igualdad, por la justicia, por la libertad, por la paz. Por eso esta jornada de hoy es muy importante, es mirar hacia adelante, es buscar este compromiso colectivo entre sociedad civil y municipios, entre ayuntamientos y entidades. Por eso el ejercicio de sumar a todos los agentes sociales para poner la voz donde los estados callan. Demasiados silencios, demasiados estados que no han dado el paso. Hoy tiene que ser el reinicio de la campaña para exigir a nuestros países que los gobiernos firmen el Tratado de Eliminación de las Armas Nucleares. En un camino imprescindible para hacer de nuestro mundo un mundo construido a través de la palabra, del diálogo, y construido desde la proximidad, desde cada barrio, desde cada ciudad, porque la paz se alimenta no en las grandes mesas de los estados, sino que se alimenta del esfuerzo y del liderazgo de muchas personas que desde cada ciudad, desde cada equipamiento público, desde cada municipio, están abriendo un discurso para conseguir que las armas nucleares desaparezcan, pero no solamente las armas nucleares, sino que avancemos hacia un mundo en que las desigualdades sean eliminadas a partir del esfuerzo colectivo de construir un mundo en paz, en libertad y a partir del diálogo. Día importante, hay muchas palabras a oír hoy, muchas aportaciones que sabemos que serán muy interesantes y el inicio o el reinicio de un camino que debemos transitar juntos y juntas. Y hoy no estamos aquí, ICAN, Nuclear Free Local Authorities y Alcaldes por la Paz, sección europea, para poner este espejo a la vieja Europa y analizar sus contradicciones y avanzar contra los armamentos nuclear, pero también contra todo aquello que nos haga caminar hacia la violencia. Luchar contra las violencias es el camino para construir este futuro que queremos. Gracias por estar aquí y les deseo que tengan una mañana muy interesante con debates que nos enriquezcan a todos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mayor Mayoral. We now are going to get our second or our third welcome today, and we're very pleased that we're involved in this webinar with the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, who have re-energised the international disarmament movement. Founded in Australia in 2007, ICAN is a coalition of over 500 groups that seek to see global nuclear disarmament. ICAN played a focal role with a number of non-member weapon states to establish a number of international conferences on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, which led to the agreement in 2007 of an international treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. For its work on that endeavour, ICAN received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. So I'm pleased to welcome, for her introductory comments, the Executive Director of ICAN, Beatrice Finn. Beatrice has been the Executive Director since 2014, and we welcome her to briefly introduce the work of ICAN. So Beatrice, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sean, and hi everyone, good morning. And first, just I want to thank Mayor Mayoral for his really great opening words. And it's a real pleasure for ICAN to join here today together with the UK and Ireland nuclear-free local authorities, and of course the European chapter of Mayors for Peace in holding this webinar. And I want to start by congratulating the whole Mayors for Peace family for the launch of the European chapter. And we in ICAN have very deeply appreciated a close cooperation and friendship with the Mayors for Peace for many years now, and in particular on raising awareness of the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and of course also the ICAN Cities Appeal, the success of which would not have been achieved without Mayors for Peace. So thank you again and congratulations. Earlier this year in August, we commemorated the 75th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And for ICAN, as for all of us who work on nuclear disarmament, the tragedy that befell those cities, as well as the heroic spirit of the survivors, the hibakusha, are perhaps the main motivator which drives our work. And the story of nuclear weapons really began with the cities. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the true nature of the horrors of nuclear weapons were revealed. They are, by design, city destroyers, meant to wreak the maximum amount of horrific consequences possible and destroy everything and everyone in their path. And this is what they were always intended to do, these weapons. And of course, any use of nuclear weapons is unacceptable and immoral, but it is especially revealing that the main targets of these weapons are still urban areas with high population densities. That is what is at the core of the misguided and dangerous philosophy of nuclear deterrence. And it's only fitting, therefore, that cities, towns, and local authorities take a leading role in bringing about the end of nuclear weapons. And of course, as all of you know well, we have a new tool at our disposal, which we will rally around to force national governments to change their policies. And that is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which will enter into force on January 22nd, 2021. And we have a really wonderful agenda here today at this event that will showcase an area of great hope in the field of activism and political engagement, the power of local government to bring about change. Cities and towns and local authorities are champions in challenging the world's most urgent existential issues. And cities are becoming more and more influential and important actors on the world stage than ever. We've seen it with climate change, we've seen it with tackling the urban violence around the world, and we're seeing it today with the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, we are also seeing it in the area of nuclear disarmament. And this is really the understanding that underpins the ICAN Cities Appeal, which aims to promote the initiatives that municipalities can take to stand up against nuclear weapons, and the national governments that continue to cling on to them for their security. And cities and local authorities can form a close and active link with their constituencies and local social movements. An international coalition of cities and civil society can therefore play a game-changing role in breaking the unacceptable status quo in nuclear weapons policies and taking a decisive step towards elimination. So I'm very grateful and sending a lot of thanks to all the mayors and cities officials that are joining us here today, and of course to everyone else who's following from around the world. Thank you for being here, and we very much look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. So we now move on to our first keynote speaker, our keynote to give a context to today's webinar, really. Dr. Tutti Irasto is a senior researcher in the prestigious Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI. She's a particular expert on the workings of both the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Our President, Mayor Matsui, in his speech in Hiroshima on the 6th of August, warned of a new Cold War of self-centered nationalism in the nuclear weapons debate. So we have asked Dr. Irasto to consider the state of European peace and security and how the disarmament debate may change over the next few years. So welcome, Dr. Irasto, to today's webinar.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this important event. So the title of my presentation is inspired by the remarks made by the mayor of Hiroshima, as Sean mentioned, who expressed concern that self-centered nationalism we have seen in recent years was preventing meaningful discussion on nuclear weapons and increasing related risks. And while the mayor was looking at the issue from a global perspective, I was asked to focus especially on Europe in my speech. And there has indeed been a wave of nationalism that has come at the cost of cooperative security and multilateralism in recent years. And in the nuclear field, this has been reflected, among other things, in lack of respect for international agreements, as well as, I would say, lack of responsible leadership, as seen in the rhetoric and actions of major nuclear weapon states. And instead of arms control and disarmament, such rhetoric has often highlighted the value of nuclear weapons as a source of security and prestige. And the related erosion of the norm against nuclear weapons is certainly a threat to Europe, I would say. Although in this talk, I want to highlight that nuclear threats and dependence on nuclear deterrence is not just the result of the recent political circumstances outside of Europe, but a long-term problem in which Europe is also deeply involved. At the same time, I want to highlight an opposing trend, which was already discussed or mentioned by the previous speakers, that we have seen in recent years. That is the ever stronger demands for nuclear disarmament, as illustrated by the negotiation of a new treaty, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in 2017. And while awareness of nuclear weapons and related risks have grown as a result of both these negative and positive trends, many have been disappointed by the predominant European response to the situation. And in what follows, I'll try to describe these current trends, explain the European positions in relation to them, and finally consider the prospects for a more progressive European approach to disarmament, at least briefly. So let me begin with the negative trend that has highlighted the perceived prestige and security benefits of nuclear weapons in recent years. Already before, but particularly during the presidency of Donald Trump in the United States, we have witnessed unprecedented nuclear threats and boasting by both US and Russian presidents. And this rhetorical lack of restraint has already raised concerns about increased readiness by the two biggest nuclear weapon possessors to use their nuclear weapons. And such concerns have been further increased by the actual deployment of low-yield nuclear weapons, which lower the threshold for using nuclear weapons for warfighting purposes. At the same time, important pillars of the US-Russian arms control architecture have collapsed, and there's little indication of any new serious arms control process between these two countries. Instead, like most other nuclear weapon states, Russia and the United States are modernizing their arsenals in a political context that is defined by high levels of distrust. And widespread concerns over this worsened situation has given new urgency to nuclear disarmament. That is this parallel trend represented by the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or ban treaty, to use a shorter term. In stark contrast to the heightened role of nuclear weapons, the ban treaty has for the first time created a comprehensive legal prohibition against nuclear weapons, including against their possession and threat of use. And the decision to negotiate this new treaty actually predates or has to do with reasons that go deeper than the current political context. And these reasons are related to some systemic issues within the older treaty, the 1968 Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or NPT in short, which is often described as the cornerstone of the global nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime. And in the NPT, the non-nuclear weapon states have agreed never to acquire nuclear weapons, whereas the 5 countries that had already acquired their nuclear weapons before the negotiation of the NPT would keep their nuclear weapons while committing to move towards disarmament. But that was 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, but now it's 50 years after the entry into force of the NPT. And as we see, there has been very little progress towards nuclear disarmament. And disarmament is, as most of you are probably not familiar with the NPT, but just as a reminder, disarmament is considered as one of the 3 pillars of the NPT alongside non-proliferation and the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And the other 2 pillars, they have been implemented with quite remarkable success. The NPT now is nearly universal, and the majority of non-nuclear weapon states, they have accepted strict international atomic energy safeguards to verify their commitment never to develop nuclear weapons. And this in turn has allowed them the peaceful use of nuclear energy. However, Article 6, which contains the legal commitment for the nuclear weapon state to proceed towards disarmament, still remains unimplemented. And this weakness of the disarmament pillar of the NPT, it has to do with the formulation of the treaty, because unlike with the obligations for the non-nuclear weapon states to accept nuclear safeguards to verify their commitments, the NPT doesn't envision any verification regime or time frame for disarmament. And over the years, the lopsided implementation of the NPT has led to a growing sense of disillusionment among the non-nuclear weapon states. And of course, like the United States and Russia often remind us, their arsenals were greatly reduced after the Cold War, but both still possess huge stockpiles of nuclear weapons, and their arms control diplomacy has been deadlocked for over a decade now. And what is more, even the more modest steps towards disarmament that have been jointly agreed at the previous 5-yearly review conferences of the NPT remain unimplemented. I won't list all of these steps here, but for example, the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which was negotiated in the 90s, has still not been ratified, and the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty has not even been negotiated, also despite plans to do so since the 1990s. And all this has raised the question as to whether the nuclear weapon states' disarmament commitments under the NPT have just been empty promises intended to legitimize their continued possession of nuclear weapons. And I wanted to discuss this background because it's important for understanding why the majority of the world's non-nuclear weapon states saw the need for a new treaty, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. As the supporters of the treaty repeatedly argue, their aim is not to undermine the NPT, but rather to strengthen its weak disarmament pillar. Yet one of the main criticisms against the ban treaty has been its alleged incompatibility with the NPT. And not surprisingly, this criticism is mostly coming from the nuclear weapon states, some of whom have even pressured their allies and other non-nuclear weapon states not to join the relevant negotiations or not to sign the treaty after its negotiation. And according to recent reports, they have even asked countries that have joined to withdraw their ratification, which is quite unprecedented. However, the basis for this opposition is, I would say, political rather than legal, as the two treaties are hardly incompatible when you look at the text of the treaties. And in fact, I was also present at the negotiations of the ban treaty, and there I saw, and you can see in the text of the treaty, that the drafters took great care to avoid any conflict with the NPT. In addition to highlighting the vital role of the NPT in its preamble, Article 18 of the ban treaty states that the implementation of the treaty shall not prejudice obligations undertaken by state parties with regards to existing international agreements, where those obligations are consistent with the treaty. And of course, the norm against nuclear weapons is much stronger in the ban treaty, whose comprehensive prohibition stigmatizes all nuclear weapons as immoral and illegal, regardless of who possesses them. In contrast, the NPT provided a monopoly of such weapons to the 5 countries that had nuclear weapons, but this exception was accepted temporarily, mainly due to the difficulty of short-term disarmament and concerns about further proliferation in the late 60s when NPT was negotiated. So at the same time, the NPT clearly points to the need for eventual disarmament by the nuclear weapon states. So in this sense, the two treaties are perfectly compatible. Another and related criticism towards the ban treaty is that it somehow undermines existing International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards. But actually, when you look at Article 3 of the ban treaty, it requires state parties to maintain their existing safeguards without prejudice to any additional relevant instruments. So the ban treaty doesn't weaken existing verification commitments by the non-nuclear weapon states, most of which are anyway, they have already accepted the highest verification standard of the International Atomic Energy Agency, that is the additional protocol to their safeguards agreement. There is also quite little to back the arguments that the ban treaty would encourage withdrawals from the NPT. Because if countries do decide to abandon the NPT in favor of the ban treaty, it's hard to imagine that, and this would then probably have something to do with the internal legitimacy crisis within the NPT. And actually the most likely case that states would withdraw from the NPT would be because they, like North Korea some years ago, and like every other nuclear weapon state, start to believe that they need nuclear weapons to guarantee their national security. And being part of the ban treaty will certainly not help them in the pursuit of nuclear weapons. And finally, there is quite a different concern, which is that to the extent that the ban treaty succeeds in delegitimizing nuclear deterrence, it could undermine trust in extended deterrence, which in turn could drive countries that are currently under the so-called nuclear umbrella, that is under the protection of a nuclear weapon state. It might drive them to acquire nuclear weapons of their own. However, it's difficult to imagine that the ban treaty would be the decisive factor pushing umbrella states to acquire nuclear weapons, especially when you consider that the United States is the only nuclear weapon state providing nuclear umbrella to its allies, and at the same time it's been the biggest opponent to the ban treaty. However, I think this concern is quite important because it captures perhaps the most fundamental point of divergence in the debate over the ban treaty, which is whether the perceived security benefits of nuclear deterrence for certain nuclear weapon states and their allies justify risking the catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapon use, possibly at the cost of the entire planet. I mean, nuclear weapons can destroy entire cities and civilizations, but as recent studies and older studies of nuclear winter show, it might also threaten the entire humanity and the planetary existence. So while the ban treaty is very clear in rejecting this logic, the NPT neither prohibits or embraces deterrence. Yet the NPT too recognizes the devastation upon all mankind caused by nuclear war and the consequent need to make every effort to avoid it. And it could also be noted that critics have long argued that NATO's nuclear sharing arrangements are actually inconsistent with Articles 1 and 2 of the NPT, in which state parties commit themselves not to transfer to any recipient whatsoever nuclear weapons or control over such weapons, and not to receive such transfers. So the topic of extended nuclear deterrence, it's very relevant for Europe, which is the only place in the world where such arrangements still exists alongside other forms of nuclear deterrence. More specifically, Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey all host US so-called tactical nuclear weapons, meaning shorter range and lower yield weapons that are meant to be used in the battlefield, or the so-called theater of war, which in this case means the European continent. At the same time, 2 European countries, France and the UK, have their own nuclear arsenals, whereas all NATO allies are under the US nuclear umbrella, meaning that the United States is prepared to use its strategic nuclear weapons to protect Europe. It should be added that these nuclear weapons are also not only reserved for the limited purposes of deterrence against nuclear attacks, but both the United States and NATO, just like Russia, reserve the right for the first use of nuclear weapons, meaning that a nuclear attack could be conducted in a conventional war to gain advantage in it. So, like tactical nuclear weapons, the first use doctrine of NATO is a remnant of the Cold War, when the West thought that they need to compensate for their conventional inferiority vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. And in that context, at least from a military strategic perspective, the short-range tactical nuclear weapons can be seen to have made some military sense, as they could reach Eastern Europe, which was then part of the Warsaw Pact. However, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO nuclear policy has lost much of its military sense. First of all, the Western conventional military capabilities are now clearly superior to those of Russia, so the rationale for the first use doctrine is gone. And as for the tactical nuclear weapons in Europe, they can't, I mean, those deployed in the European countries, they can't even reach the enemy because Russia is actually outside of their range. And both of these points were frequently raised in the more critical discussions on NATO nuclear policy after the Cold War and before the Ukraine crisis. And in that discussion, it was often recognized that tactical nuclear weapons in Europe mainly serve a symbolic rather than a military function. And critics pointed out that they also included several risks, calling for their withdrawal from Europe. Unfortunately, the subsequent Russian annexation of Crimea effectively silenced that discussion by highlighting the need to demonstrate Allied unity. And to many, Russian aggression also enforced the need for nuclear deterrence. And we heard arguments that if Ukraine would have had nuclear weapons, this wouldn't have happened. And I think this renewed importance of nuclear weapons in Europe is reflected well, for example, in the recent statement by NATO Secretary General, who argued that nuclear deterrence remains a vital part of keeping our peace and freedom. And he even went as far as saying that nuclear sharing helps to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons, arguing that if such arrangements came to an end, more countries may again seek their own nuclear weapons. So if you try to apply this argument universally, you can see how problematic this logic actually is. Because if all countries in the world would think like this, it would mean that, and if they also feel that they face similar security threats, they would either need to host other countries' nuclear weapons or develop such weapons of their own. So this is what I mean by saying that Europe is at threat not only by the recent self-centered nationalism, which has, of course, made things worse, but also by its own biases when it comes to nuclear weapons. And against this background, it's also not so difficult to understand European reactions to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. As nuclear weapon states, France and the UK have openly criticized the new treaty, and their NATO allies have joined this criticism. And only a handful of European countries participated in the ban treaty negotiations, and 5 have eventually joined the treaty. Even Finland, my own country, and Sweden, where I am working, they are not part of NATO, but still they have kept their distance from the ban treaty, probably out of fear of the reactions of the nuclear weapon states and because they want to avoid controversy with their fellow Europeans. At least that's my interpretation. And these positions were quite clear in a recent United Nations General Assembly First Committee resolution that expressed support for the ban treaty, where all nuclear weapon states and most European countries cast a negative vote. And of course, this is not a fair description of all European positions on the ban treaty and disarmament in general, because there are different perspectives within the countries that officially support the existing nuclear deterrence policies, as seen, for example, in Germany, where arguments, for example, against tactical nuclear weapons are frequently heard. However, until now, the more critical voices have been in the minority, or even if representing majority, for example, in parliamentary debates or expressed by individual influential politicians, such views have not really been reflected in actual policies. Instead, nuclear policies have thus far been almost the sacred realm of national security, which is largely unchallenged by democratic discussion. And I think one big reason for this is the general lack of awareness of nuclear weapons and related risks among the population, especially after the Cold War, when many have kind of forgotten that nuclear weapons even exists. And after all, this has been the paradox with nuclear weapons threat always, because as long as nuclear weapons are not used, they are largely invisible. Of course, we have the events in Hiroshima and Nagasaki to remind us, but the fact that they haven't been used for such a long time has created this false sense of security that we might be safe from nuclear weapons. So the ban treaty, I think, plays a very important role in raising awareness of this invisible global threat, and thus it could contribute to a more open and democratic discussion on nuclear weapons. And as such, it might eventually strengthen the domestic pushback against existing nuclear policies, including in Europe. And this is also precisely why nuclear weapon states see the treaty as a threat, because it might undermine alliance support and credibility of nuclear deterrence from within. However, I think it's time for the opponents of the ban treaty to rethink their approach. I mean, even though they are not ready or able to join the treaty, and even though they might think it's imperfect, they should nevertheless show respect for the countries that negotiated, signed, and joined the treaty, and are thus ready to further strengthen their commitment not to ever acquire nuclear weapons. And the treaty, with its entry into force, it's also becoming part of the, it is also already part of the international legal framework, and with the entry into force, its role is more established, and going against this treaty framework is, I think, very harmful. So to come back to the question in the title of my presentation, I think self-centered nationalism is indeed putting Europe at risks, but the roots of the problem go much deeper than the present era. And I know the mayor of Hiroshima probably used this term to refer mainly to the more recent erosion of multilateralism. But when you think about the ethics of nuclear deterrence in general, nuclear deterrence always relies on a very limited notion of security that could be described as both selfish and reckless. And in addition to claiming the right to protect oneself at the expense of others, any security benefits of nuclear deterrence to oneself are also overshadowed by the risk of nuclear escalation, of which the user of nuclear weapons are not protected either. And while changing mindsets is difficult, I think both civil society and local authorities can play an important role in helping to develop a more sustainable approach for arms control and disarmament, and in reducing the dangerous dependence on nuclear deterrence. And in my view, in Europe, such a more sustainable approach would include, for example, withdrawing the militarily obsolete and potentially dangerous tactical nuclear weapons from Europe, getting rid of the destabilizing first use doctrine, and encouraging the United States to do the same, and making efforts to solve conflicts with Russia through other means than more militarization, and related to that, strongly oppose deployments of new non-strategic missiles and low-yield nuclear weapons anywhere, including on the European continent. And I think the ban treaty provides moral clarity for efforts against nuclear weapons by reminding us that the only guarantee that nuclear weapons are never used is their complete elimination, and that the catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons use would not only be felt on the civilian populations of the country that is labeled as enemy, but also the populations of third parties and ourselves. And hopefully the ban treaty's entry into force could also move the international discussion towards a more constructive direction. So away from the treaty's shortcomings to the more fundamental questions that it's actually intended to raise. In short, whether we are really willing to accept the enormous risks that come with the security based on nuclear deterrence. And finally, the Biden presidency in the United States, I think it gives some hope for progress. I mean, it will probably not go as far, the Biden presidency will probably not go as far as to embrace the ban treaty. But anyway, this will hopefully mark a new era with renewed commitment to the goal of disarmament and efforts at mitigating nuclear risks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very, very thorough overview of the issues. For those who've asked, the paper will be made available after the meeting, and as I say, this meeting is recorded as well, really. So now we've heard the context, we want to bring it into what local authorities can and are doing, really. We have 3 mayors now speaking, whose cities have passed resolutions to support the TPNW. And they are one of over 400 cities around Europe, North America and Australia and even India that have passed such resolutions. The first city we want to profile this morning is a city that's providing strong support for the work of the European Chapter of Mayors of Peace. the city of Barcelona. So we're very delighted to welcome the Deputy Mayor of Barcelona, Laia Bonet-Rull, who's able to speak to us today about why Barcelona has passed a TPNW resolution and why it's a full supporter of the ICAN Cities Appeal. So over to you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, dear friends. Greetings from Barcelona. First of all, let me convey to all of you our wish that you are well and healthy in these troubled times. This year, we are commemorating the 75th anniversary of the first use of the atomic weapons in the world. Back in 1945, one of the darkest pages in humankind's history brought about one of the most valuable institutions society has seen, the United Nations. Indeed, 2020 is also the United Nations 75th anniversary. Over the last year, cities and local governments across the world have been calling for a more inclusive and representative multilateral system if we want to maintain and expand peace in our planet. From Barcelona, we are convinced that what the world needs is a strengthened multilateral system that allows for peaceful coexistence among peoples and effective responses to global challenges. Bridging the local and the global is the only way we will be able to effectively address the challenges our communities face. So if we are to succeed in this, I am convinced that we will need a renewed structure for global dialogue and decision-making, one that allows for an inclusive, more representative, up-to-date multilateralism. I think we are all certain the path to achieve this passes through cities. And what will happen next 22nd January is an excellent proof of the kind of multilateralism we need. The entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in a few weeks' time is a victory for a multi-stakeholder alliance that has brought international and non-state diplomacy at its best. Cities have said over and over again that if we want peace and development, communities must be listened. The process for the ratification of the treaty has shown us that this is the way to go. Indeed, city diplomacy has in recent years proven to be a key driver for sustainable development and peace. Back in 2015, cities raised the ambition on climate action in Paris, in a moment in which negotiations between states were failing. 1 year later, democratic local government joined forces with organized communities to see the first reference to the right to the city included in the new urban agenda. In 2020, in very difficult circumstances, the partnership between organized citizens, civil society, city governments, and parliamentarians has resulted in a landmark achievement. The first binding instrument at the international level to ban nuclear weapons. The lesson to be learned is clear. When communities and cities have a seat in the global table, change happens and progress is achieved. In the next decade, peace building will also need to go hand in hand with addressing the main challenges our world faces: the climate crisis, the digital transformation, and the quest for effective gender equality. Therefore, peace will need an updated human rights system, integrating a new generation of rights that will shape what living a dignified life means. This means developing and ensuring digital and climate rights. And last but not least, gender equality is a foundation of peace. And this means that a feminist multilateralism is also an urgent need. Current decision-making processes often leave off the table the views, needs, and rights of half the world's population and build on male-dominated politics that are in fact halting our ability to address planetary challenges. Women leadership must be advanced, and women's rights must be protected in any and all plans to strengthen the multilateral system. We must stand by an inclusive multilateralism that effectively addresses the challenges of our times, protects the rights of our communities, and gives voice to the voiceless. Only this way we will be able to maintain international peace and security in the next decade. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Very inspiring. And I'd like to then pass over now to our second mayor to speak today on these issues. We're delighted to welcome the Mayor of Oslo, Marianne Borgen, to speak on how the capital of Norway passed a resolution supporting the TPNW and her views on internationalism. Mayor Borgen welcomed ICAN when it was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo in 2017 and remains a very strong supporter of the Mayors for Peace as well. So over to you, Mayor Borgen.
Well, thank you so much. And dear friends of peace, for 75 years, the world has lived with an incomprehensible threat. The certainty that should nuclear weapons be used again, the consequences would be enormous for countries, regions, and perhaps even the whole world. The bombs dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki represented terror in its cruelest form. That changed the world completely. The city of Oslo has a broad international engagement. We cooperate with other cities all over the world. Peace and human rights are an important part of our international involvement. And naturally, we are proud of hosting the annual Nobel Peace Prize ceremony each year. And I was myself overjoyed when ICAN received it in Oslo City Hall in December 2017. Despite our international cooperation, the city has rarely taken a stand when it comes to questions related to foreign policy. There has been an acceptance of the view that these matters are taken care of by national authorities. This practice has been followed even though a municipality can freely express its views, for instance, about whether or not Norway should sign the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons or not. Because nuclear weapons specifically target cities, a large majority of our city council voted in favor of encouraging the Norwegian government to sign the treaty last year, and I'm very happy for that. The threat that nuclear arms represent was my primary reason for getting involved in politics when I was young. I am so proud that Oslo last year decided to join the campaign. 50 nations have now ratified the treaty, meaning that it will enter into force on January the 22nd in 2021. This is a crucial milestone, but our struggle will continue until all nuclear weapons on Earth have been disarmed. We believe the threat that nuclear weapons represent to humanity cannot be exaggerated. Nuclear weapons are made to kill, to destroy, not only on the battlefield, they are designed to eradicate our cities from the face of the Earth. In the blink of an eye, a nuclear detonation would wipe a metropolitan center off the map, laying waste to countless lives, destroying all infrastructure, and poisoning the environment. This isn't hypothetical. Cities are the main targets of nuclear weapons. Our citizens have the right to live in a world free of nuclear arms. Any use of nuclear weapons, be it deliberately or because of a mistake or an accident, would have disastrous, far-reaching consequences for people, society, and the environment. This is why the city of Oslo signed the ICAN Cities Appeal. We strongly encourage Norway and also other countries to sign the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I believe that it is important and necessary that cities take responsibility and speak up when the policies of national governments go in the wrong direction. In the past years, we have seen the international arms control regime deteriorate. The end of the INF Treaty, the Open Skies Treaty, and regretfully, the steady work of nuclear weapon states of renewing, not disarming, their nuclear weapons. At the same time, we see that cities take a larger role with regards to international questions that traditionally have been the domain of national governments. The Paris Agreement from 2015 is one good example. Cities are deeply affected by many international issues. Therefore, we must also be a part of their solution. We must work together to implement the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we have experienced that cities can come up with solutions and be more innovative than national governments. Therefore, in many aspects, cities can be frontrunners, and they are. The city of Oslo is a proud member of Mayors for Peace, which play a key role in uniting and involving cities all over the world against nuclear weapons. The ICAN Cities Appeal is a fine example of how cities can get involved and put pressure on national government. As a mother and also as a grandmother, I must admit that I am worried for the future. 3 decades after the end of the Cold War, we face the threat of new arms race that inevitably might involve an upgrade of the world's nuclear arsenal. We must speak up and challenge this development. Nuclear weapons are designed for one purpose, not for deterrence. They are made to kill and maximize the destructive effects of war. They are a threat to the survival of humanity, and we must therefore join our efforts to have them banned. 40 Norwegian municipalities have so far signed ICAN's Cities Appeal, and an increasing number of members of the Norwegian Parliament are also demanding that the Norwegian government should sign the treaty. Therefore, I encourage cities all over the world to follow our example and join the ICAN Cities Appeal. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Merbargen. Again, very, very inspiring, and it's great to hear what's happening in Norway. So our third mayor, our third short case study, brings us now to a nuclear weapons state of France, really. And Mayor Philippe Rio is the mayor of Grigny, which lies on the outskirts of Paris. He's also the chair of the French Mayors for Peace chapter. And he's going to briefly talk to us today about how French cities, large and small, like Paris, Lyon and Grenoble, have supported the TPNW. So over to you, Mayor Rio.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Très heureux de participer à cette rencontre si attendue. Plusieurs points de mon intervention. Le premier, je me souviens en août 2017, lors de la 9e conférence de Mayors for Peace, les maires avaient lancé l'appel de Nagasaki pour l'abolition des armes nucléaires et une paix mondiale durable. Cet appel visait à lancer la campagne pour soutenir le Tian. Et donc, c'est une victoire que nous avons remportée. Participer à cette belle étape, à cette belle victoire. En France, grâce à la mobilisation d'ICAN France, que je remercie, mais aussi de Maires pour la Paix France, plus de 32 villes ont soutenu le Tian. Et je pense notamment à la ville de Paris, qui est bien évidemment symbolique dans ce soutien à nos combats, à notre mobilisation et nos engagements. D'ici le 22 janvier, d'autres villes vont nous rejoindre et nous avons donc là le support d'un développement extrêmement important et précieux. Lors de cette conférence d'août 2017 à Nagasaki, nous avions, avec quelques-uns, porté l'idée et la nécessité de développer des territoires sûrs et résilients pour faire face aux violences urbaines, pour faire face à la violence du terrorisme qui frappe nos villes. Et aujourd'hui, la constitution du chapitre européen de Mer pour la paix est une excellente nouvelle, un point d'appui remarquable pour, comme le rappelait Monsieur le maire d'Hiroshima, les 3000 villes européennes déjà membres de Mayor for Peace, mais également une nouvelle force et un point d'appui pour l'association Mayor for Peace. Nous allons pouvoir travailler dans la proximité, nous allons pouvoir renforcer le réseau mondial parce que nous sommes tous convaincus de la nécessité de lutter contre le développement des armes nucléaires, mais aussi développer la culture de paix dans la conception que nous a donnée l'UNESCO avec les 8 piliers de la culture de paix et bien évidemment au titre des objectifs du développement durable de l'ONU, les ODD, son objectif numéro 16 sur la paix et la sécurité. S'agissant de l'activité de Mer pour la paix France dans ce moment, on peut dire, historique, vous le savez, la France est un pays détenteur de l'arme nucléaire et l'engagement des villes et des gouvernements locaux fait face à une adversité politique et une adversité institutionnelle extrêmement forte. D'ailleurs, nous ne manquons pas de dénoncer le choix de la France qui a voté une loi de programmation militaire pour les années 2019-2025 pour moderniser son arsenal nucléaire pour un montant de 37 milliards d'euros sur la période 2019-2025, soit une dépense quotidienne de 12 millions d'euros par jour consacrée à la dissuasion et à la modernisation de l'arsenal nucléaire français. Il y a aussi des initiatives très positives. Je pense à la région Normandie qui, en 2018, a créé un forum mondial pour la paix et la résolution pacifique des conflits, et bien évidemment l'ensemble des villes engagées. Et je suis sûr que la situation actuelle va multiplier le nombre de villes dans nos combats en commun. Pour conclure, la culture de paix, cela a été dit par plusieurs intervenants, ce sont aussi les droits de l'homme, le droit à l'éducation, le droit à la ville, le droit au logement, l'inclusion sociale, l'égalité femmes-hommes. Les maires, plus que jamais, dans cette période historique de crise sanitaire, de crise sociale qui va être durable, de crise économique, mais aussi écologique, nous avons fait la démonstration par la proximité avec nos administrés que nous sommes des réponses concrètes à la vie de nos concitoyens. Nous avons donc un rôle déterminant pour affronter cette crise globale. Nous avons la confiance de nos concitoyens. Nous devons continuer, plus que jamais, à éclairer les consciences, les débats sur la nécessité absolue de la paix, du désarmement nucléaire comme élément constitutif d'une humanité bienveillante que nous appelons tous de nos vœux. Merci pour votre attention.
Merci, Mario. And I'd like now to put forward the final speaker of this session to just bring some context to the ICAN Cities Appeal. We've heard 3 excellent local case studies of cities that have passed the treaty. We now want to hear about what it's about, really, what it entails. We've got Daniel Hogster now to speak. Daniel is the campaigns director of ICAN. He leads on the ICAN Cities Appeal for ICAN. He's going to talk about why the inspiring actions of the likes of Oslo, Barcelona and Greener and over 400 other councils really matters, and how we want to see many more sign up to these sort of resolutions. So, Daniel, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Sean, and warm greetings from an otherwise cold and rainy Geneva, Switzerland, which is where the ICAN headquarters is based. Well, you've just heard from 3 champions of the ICAN Cities Appeal from Barcelona, Oslo, and Cluny, who spoke excellently about what it means to them and for their city. So thank you so much, Deputy Mayor Bonnet, Mayor Borgen, and Mayor Rio for the leadership that your cities are showing on this. At a basic level, in general, the ICAN Cities Appeal is a commitment by a city to recognize and spread awareness of the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, and to call on their governments to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW. Over 370 cities, towns, and other local authorities have joined the Cities Appeal so far around the world. They range from major metropolitan areas to small towns, but all are equally important and equally strident in their support of this new treaty. In terms of how a city operationalizes the appeal, of course, the contexts are very different for different places. I don't think I have to explain that to this audience here today. But we do have some suggested actions for cities, towns, and local authorities. These range from simple actions such as reaching out to the government through writing a letter, media work, holding an exhibition, to, in some circumstances, more substantial initiatives, like ensuring that the city's pension fund is divested from nuclear weapons producing companies. An effort like that is currently underway in New York City. For more information about how to join, if you represent a city or town, or how to work with your city or town, go to the ICAN website or just email me. I want to present a bit about the European context as it concerns the TPNW. Dr. Resto provided a really superb overview before, so I'm fortunate that I just can add a little bit as it concerns the TPNW before we get into the discussion. As was outlined at the very beginning of the call by Mayor Mayoral, 3 states in Europe, Austria, Ireland, and Malta, have joined the TPNW. 2 others have signed. And these were all among the states that have made the treaty a reality and were very involved in the negotiations. The fact that these countries find themselves in the minority in Europe is no surprise, really. The long-standing pressure from within NATO and the United States, from the United States in particular, to hold the line against the ban is by now very well known, as Dr. Resto laid out. For the states that host nuclear weapons, US nuclear weapons on their territory, Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey, the decision to accept these weapons of mass destruction onto their territory was never put to a vote, and still has never really been publicly acknowledged or confirmed by their governments. For the others, the public has been told very little of exactly how they would be involved or are currently involved in the military preparations to use nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, many of these same states pride themselves on being defenders of humanitarianism and democracy. The TPNW will make this double standard very hard to maintain. The point is that governments that are complicit in nuclear weapons want to keep the issue in the shadows. They want to stop or lessen public debate. They want to pretend that it's all a matter for the nuclear weapon states and there's nothing else to be done. The TPNW has already started to drag the nuclear weapons question out of the shadows and into the public sphere, and the political ramifications are likely to be significant. National awareness is needed to advance the norm embodied by the TPNW, especially in the nuclear weapon states and especially in those countries that are in military alliances which involve the threat of use of nuclear weapons. This is where local governments come into play through the ICAN Cities Appeal. Because of their close links with the grassroots and local politics, they can make people feel more engaged in the issue and also to understand how the issue affects them. We've heard that very well from many speakers, including the three mayors before me. There's also, of course, the element of influencing party politics flowing up from the local to the national level. We have seen this happen already in several countries where the ICAN Cities Appeal has taken hold. Cities are champions in challenging the world's most urgent and even existential issues. Deputy Mayor Bonnet, Mayor Borgen, and Mayor Rio have highlighted many of these initiatives and how cities are important in driving the response to them. It's ICAN's honor to work alongside them, and we look forward with excitement to the possibilities in 2021. I think I'll leave it there, and I look forward to an interesting discussion. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for that context. We're actually early now as well, which is even better, Daniel. So that gives us a little more time to have a panel discussion, really. So we've had some questions in, and I encourage our attendees, if they wish to ask any more questions, to send them in now, really, as well. But the first question that has come in is for Tutti and for Beatrice. We have two different trends going on at the moment, and next year is going to be critical. We have on one side multilateral movement with the TPNW, lots of engagement between states and so far. But on the other side, we've got real tension in nuclear weapon discussions, a real unilateralism, and we've got two major conferences next year, the NPT in August and probably the first state parties conference of the TPNW. What would you consider would be the major trends that could occur in 2021 and onwards? Will the unilateralism that's been occurring over the last few years be overcome by a more multilateral approach? Will President Biden have a positive role in this? And what would you see as the prospects that any European states starting to engage in the multilateral processes that the TPNW encourages? So could I ask Dr. Rastow and Beatrice to make some comments on those trends that are going on and what they may perceive would happen over the next year or two?
Sure, which one should go first?
If you want to go first.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I hope, and I think there will be at least a turn away from the worst kind of unilateralism towards multilateralism led by the United States, although I think that might not be enough to save the review conference. I mean, the review conference is, the NPT review conference is now scheduled for August. And I mean, I think something really, given all the background of all the unimplemented commitments, the lack of progress towards disarmament, I don't think that problem will be resolved by Biden. I mean, he doesn't even have the time, even if he has the political will and ability. But at least the atmosphere will be better at the conference, but I don't think there will be real progress towards disarmament. But the atmosphere will also hopefully be made better by reversal of some of the most destructive actions we have seen, like hopefully the United States will return to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, and at least extend the New START treaty with Russia, although again, that's not progress, it's just going back to where we have been until now. There was another part of the question regarding the European approach towards the ban treaty. Maybe I'll leave that to Beatrice.
Well, I think Beatrice has dropped off the call, so Daniel has agreed to answer that question as well.
Okay.
Yes, it looks like Beatrice had some technical issues and fell off, but I'll do my best. Well, I think, 2021 is going to be a kind of a crucial year in terms of, judging the impact of the TPNW and how it's going to affect these contexts in Europe. Obviously, did you mention about the NPT, the review conference? There are several elections that are happening in some of the countries that have been the most vocal about the TPNW, most vocally against the TPNW in some cases. These countries include Netherlands and Germany, Sweden, Norway, for example. So the TPNW is going to be a question in all of in some of these countries. It is actually on a high priority in the foreign policy debate leading into those elections. And we see, if we take Belgium as an indicator, Belgium recently formed a coalition government after, I think, over 500 days without a government. And there's now a coalition government between 7 parties. 4 of these parties are in support of the TPNW. And they pushed hard, and we understand that up until the final days of this negotiating the coalition agreement, they were pushing hard to make sure there was a reference to the TPNW. And at the end, there was, and it's a positive. It's a, we have to be honest. It's a modestly positive reference, but it is a reference nonetheless. And that's the first such example of a TPNW reference in the governing document of a NATO country. So that's an incredibly significant development. And we've seen in Germany, for example, the Greens, who are in a good position to be part of the next government, if polls are to be believed. They've also recently, in their party election manifesto, have committed to trying to get Germany to join the TPNW as well. So whereas before the kind of it seemed to be this solid block in some of these countries against the TPNW, that's starting to change now as well. And I think that's really due to pressure from civil society, as well as from cities, towns, and local authorities.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. I'd like to ask now the 3 mayors that spoke. One thing that was a sort of link to all 3 of your presentations was how local authorities are involved in other big issues, international issues, particularly climate change and attacking terrorism and trying to create a culture of peace. So, going on again for the future, what role do you see local authorities playing in trying to promote a culture of peace, both in your own cities and sort of together in a Mayors of Peace type organisation, really? How should Mayors of Peace take these issues forward, particularly as we're looking at our next session around creating safe and resilient cities? What role has the Cities Appeal and those types of approaches had on you in thinking of where your culture of peace may develop as a local authority, both in your local area and inspiring others around the country? So could I ask the Deputy Mayor of Barcelona to speak first?
Sean, okay.
Okay, Mario, please. Yes, please go ahead.
Localement, nous avons le devoir et beaucoup de moments dans l'année pour construire ce que nous appelons ici un programme local à la culture de paix. Quelques exemples importants pour que nos concitoyens soient sensibilisés à la culture de paix et à la non-violence. Il y a bien évidemment les journées internationales. La journée internationale de la paix, le 21 septembre. La journée internationale pour l'abolition des armes nucléaires, le 26 septembre, sont autant de dates pour créer des événements, construire des événements avec les citoyens. Et particulièrement les enfants et la jeunesse, avec l'engagement de la société civile et notamment les associations locales. Faire prendre conscience que tous ces événements constituent des outils nous permettent que la culture de paix. Deuxième sujet, des prises de position politiques des conseils municipaux, des gouvernements locaux, sur le TIAN, sur le TNP, sur tous les sujets qui nous concernent. Un débat politique au sein de nos instances démocratiques qui peuvent être relayées dans la population sont aussi des outils et des moyens d'intervention. Et puis, nous pouvons aussi faire des expositions avec nos bibliothèques, nos médiathèques, sur l'horreur d'Hiroshima. Nous pouvons aussi, même si cela devient très difficile, avoir des initiatives locales en présence d'Hibakusha, de survivants de l'horreur atomique, ou encore cette initiative du Peace Boat, où en France, nous tentons d'accueillir et d'organiser l'arrêt de ce Peace Boat et un échange avec les villes, des collégiens, des citoyens, sur l'horreur atomique. Donc, par exemple, en France, nous demandons aux villes et nous accompagnons les villes pour qu'ils développent un programme annuel de culture de la paix pour sensibiliser, mais aussi prendre des positions politiques extrêmement fortes sur le TIAN, par exemple. Voilà quelques exemples de participation très locale dans la proximité et dans la quotidienneté pour développer la nécessité absolue de la culture de paix et du désarmement nucléaire.
Thank you, Mario. Is Mayor Borgen there? Would Mayor Borgen like to say a few words as well?
Yes, thank you. I think that the cities can play an increasing role in the years to come when it comes to strengthening both the awareness, but also the culture of peace, as you call it. Because I think that we should also start to talk about combating nuclear weapons in connection with the battle that we have all over the world when it comes to climate change and when it comes to rescuing the planet. And because I think this is a link for me. This is a question of, you know, it links together. And in Oslo, we have tried also to build more awareness when it comes to cultural peace, because we every year, the 10th of December, are, you know, handing out the Nobel Peace Prize. And in that, in the week around the 10th of December each year, we have a very interesting cooperation with both the universities in Oslo and also the Oslo Peace Center, where we are raising a lot of debates and have seminars, and we are discussing different, you know, areas when it comes to war and conflict and injustice and the threat of human rights, children's rights. So this is, I think that we could broaden it a little bit out, because everything is more or less linked together. And I think that also facing or spotting the inequalities and the threat of injustice that we face in the world, which is a threat for peace and can make more conflicts and war, is also important to address. So I think that locally we can do a lot when it comes to awareness raising, that this is not a theoretical question, this is not a question for international bodies, this is something that affects us all locally in cities, and try to explain to people what is this all about, how can we together fight for peace and for more justice in the world. And in that connection, also the battle when it comes to nuclear weapons can be linked in that more broad discussion. That's what we are trying in Oslo anyway, and we are also cooperating a lot with our NGOs, which also play an important role through the whole year when it comes to discuss the threat that we are all facing when it comes to climate change, as well as the combating the nuclear arms. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have a message, a question now for Daniel that's come in from one of our UK peace groups, and it's around. There will be parts of Europe, cities in Europe, which where the political control may not be supportive of the TPNW, like their national government. Are there other ways peace groups can encourage, say, individual councillors or faith leaders or community leaders to also, and with parliamentarians, to support the TPNW in ways which can sort of give a local context when the local city may not be willing to support the city's appeal?
That's a really good question. Yes, I mean, we have, in addition to the ICAN Cities Appeal, obviously we have a few other initiatives, one of which is relevant to this question, I hope, is the ICAN Parliamentary Pledge, which is similar to the Cities Appeal, but it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a commitment from an elected official. And actually, as Sean knows very well, NFLA has been very active on getting local councillors to join that pledge as well. And yes, and they can work in the same. I mean, I think when we first imagined the parliamentary pledge, it would be to get the national government to change their position or to do actions in the national legislature. But similarly, it can also be used to motivate change at the local government level as well. As to faith leaders, we don't currently have an initiative like that, but I think that's something that certainly sounds very interesting. I do note that the Church of England had an op-ed in addition to their motion last year, I think, in support of the TPNW. The Church of England also submitted a joint op-ed, I think it ran in The Guardian, with lots of members of the church on board. That's a great example of solidarity with the TPNW from a different constituency. And there has been interfaith initiatives in the past. But I would say that this sounds really interesting, and this is something that if CND is keen on working with this is something that we should consider. So that's really exciting. Thanks, Sean. Did I answer the question entirely? Was there another element to it? I'm just looking at the chat.
I think that was everything. So I've got a question for Dr. Erasto. This week it was in the newspapers, in the media, that political leaders in Armenia were lamenting that they'd given up the nuclear weapons that were in their country when it was part of the Soviet Union during the recent conflagration they had with Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. You mentioned again previously about the annexation of Crimea by Russia, and again some politician in Ukraine again at the time lamented that they didn't have nuclear weapons to have prevented that. How will this quite frightening idea of deterrence, how could it change in the future, or will it remain the same, that every country thinks that if they could get nuclear weapons it will deter civil war, attacks on them by their enemies and so forth, really? Is it still a part of the problem when we talk about nuclear deterrence as well?
I guess that highlights the need of one of these smaller steps. I mean, it's not really a small step, but an important step towards disarmament. And also, I mean, for non-proliferation would be for the nuclear weapon states to give binding security guarantees, I mean, negative security assurances to the non-nuclear weapon states that they will never attack them with nuclear weapons. And of course, I mean, that's against nuclear weapons attacks, but I think that should be strengthened to act more responsibly and respect the norm of sovereignty in general, because I think this lack of respect for the sovereignty norm that we have seen in recent years, and I'm thinking here of the war against Iraq, for example, in 2003, and I'm thinking of the Russian actions in Ukraine. I mean, in both cases, that highlighted the need for a powerful deterrent, also for other countries that thought that they might be in the same situation faced by a big power. And I think I think North Korea, for example, learned something from this. So here, I think this would highlight the responsibility of the major powers to respect the sovereignty norm. I mean, that would be part of the efforts. I mean, of course, negative security assurances for non-nuclear weapon states, but more generally, so that no country would feel the need to get nuclear weapons to protect their sovereignty.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're coming now towards the end of this session now. I also am aware, because it's a long meeting, that we could all do the 5-minute comfort break as well, really. I would very much, though, like to thank Tuti and Daniel, Mayor Borgen, Deputy Mayor of Barcelona, Mayor Rio from Greener, Mayor Mayoral and Beatrice, and Mayor Matsuit for all their contributions over the last hour and a quarter. I think we've had a very, very fruitful and useful discussion. I think we've learnt a lot more. We've heard some very passionate and inspiring speeches, some very useful and good background information for the Mayors of Peace, ICAN and NFLA going forward in the future. So can I ask for your thanks to all of our speakers? I'm going to suggest just a short 5-minute break now. That we'll start again at 11. Our second session is looking at the second pillar of Mayors of Peace on safe and resilient cities. And we have 2 speakers from Manchester and from Braga as well. So I give you all now a 5-minute break. If you come back just before 11 o'clock, you can get yourself a cup of coffee or tea, go for a toilet break, which is what I need to do, and we'll restart again just before 11 o'clock. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, again. I think we're now sort of ready to start the second part of this webinar, which is looking at a second pillar of what Mayors for Peace is all about, really. A big part of our constitution, a big part of the European chapter's work for the future, which is the role of local government in promoting safe, resilient, sustainable, and more peaceful cities. And to introduce this session, we've got two case studies. Our first case study is from the city of Manchester. In 2017, Manchester, like cities across Europe, like Paris and Nice and Berlin and Barcelona, have suffered the tragedy of a terrorist attack in its city centre, when a suicide bomber exploded a device in the Manchester arena. So I'm very pleased to welcome Councillor Eddie Newman, who was the Lord Mayor of Manchester at the time, who is Manchester City Council's Mayors for Peace and Nuclear Free Local Authority representative, to explain how the city responded to this atrocity and how it is engaged in that response in what we see as the promotion of safe and more peaceful city.
Thank you, Sean. And excuse me, I'm very pleased to be with you all this morning. And I've certainly found the event so far very interesting. And I was pleased to be the person who moved the motion at Manchester City Council, getting our agreement to support the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. But as Sean said, this session is looking at the second strand of Mayors for Peace. So this presentation considers the response of Manchester City Council to the Manchester Arena terrorist attack as a case study for how councils can support the Mayors for Peace call for safer, more resilient and peaceful towns and cities. And as Sean said, I'm the Manchester City Council's nominated permanent representative to the Mayors for Peace Executive Board and to the Nuclear Free Local Authorities Steering Committee. And I was also the Lord Mayor of Manchester at the time of the Manchester Arena attack. And I was heavily involved in the compassionate and practical response to it. Now, there was meant to be a PowerPoint slides, Sean and colleagues. Is this still available or is there a problem?
I think it's going to be shown now, I hope, Manuel.
I'll just give it a moment for the slide to appear. If not, I'll carry on. With all these Zooms and webinars, there's always technical issues. I'll give it half a minute, and if it doesn't appear, I'll just carry on without the slides, but the slides might be helpful. Right, here we are. Good. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for that. So if we can now move to the second slide, please. Thank you. So what this short presentation will emphasize is how Manchester, a city of over 500,000 residents at the centre of a conurbation in Greater Manchester of 3 million people, how Manchester responded to a terrible atrocity by seeking to bring our diverse communities together to ensure inclusion, tolerance and support for each other. Community solidarity is a core part of the response to this incident, and we believe we've shown great sensitivity to the needs of the people of our city. Next slide, please. So, what happened on the 22nd of May, 2017? Over 17,000 people were watching an Ariana Grande concert at Manchester Arena. She appeals particularly to young people. That arena adjoins a major railway station, Manchester Victoria Railway Station. A large proportion of the audience were young people, many under the age of 18. At around 10:31 in the evening, a suicide bomber, Salman Abedi, originally from Libya, but who had been living in Manchester with his family for some time, a young man, exploded a bomb in a rucksack in the lobby of the arena just as many people were leaving the concert. The bomb led to many awful injuries, and 22 people sadly died, were murdered, with over 800 others injured, some seriously. Many more of the people attending and the parents waiting for them outside the arena were badly affected by the psychological trauma of what they'd seen or experienced. Next slide, please. There was a rapid response to the actual incident, with the council putting in place many emergency plans, as well as working with the emergency services. The council set up a rest centre and a family assistance centre to help those directly affected at the time. You can imagine there were family members with missing relatives who didn't know whether their relative was alive or dead. Quickly into the response, the council also established what we called the We Love Manchester Emergency Fund to coordinate the large amount of solidarity donations that were pouring in from ordinary people, as well as organisations and businesses, for the benefit of the bereaved families and the injured survivors. The council very quickly organised a mass vigil the following day, less than 24 hours after the attack, at which over 20,000 people took part. This took place in the main square outside the town hall. It has subsequently held events every year on the anniversary of the attack. Many smaller vigils and meetings were held by diverse community groups to protest against the terrorist attack and to understand the key issues the city was experiencing. For instance, the city has a significantly large population of Muslim communities, and their leaders and their members wanted very clearly to say that this attack was not done in their name. And they joined with the rest of the population of the city in condemning this attack and in actions of solidarity. As Lord Mayor, I was involved in a number of these various activities and actions. Next slide, please. As always occurs when a national tragedy happens, a national vigil event to remember those who had died and were injured in the attack was held, as I've said, on the following day. And as Lord Mayor of the city, I was the first speaker. And what I said in opening this vigil was just a brief statement as follows, with 20,000 plus people in front of me. I said that people of Manchester from all communities have come together at this vigil to condemn last night's atrocity, to remember the victims, so many of them children and young people, and to express solidarity with the families. We thank the emergency services. The people of Manchester will remember the victims forever. We will defy the terrorists by all our diverse communities working together cohesively and with mutual respect. And those remarks were well received by the people in the square. National political leaders and leaders of Manchester's faith communities attended. Other speakers were the Bishop of Manchester, representing, all the faith communities, the Chief Constable, that's the Chief of Police, and a local poet. The event started an important new narrative that Manchester would not let hate and division be the response to this tragedy, and that we are one city united in grief. Community cohesion would be the response to this attack on our values. The vigil was particularly remembered for an inspiring poem of what makes Manchester such an important city, which was recited to loud applause by local poet Tony Walsh. His poem was called "This is the Place," and it's now printed at sites across city centre. What was remarkable for us was that the world's media descended on the city, and so quickly Manchester wanted to emphasise that we are a city of peace that would not tolerate violent division in our communities in response to the attack. As Lord Mayor of Manchester, alongside many other councillors and council officers, I took part in many emotional meetings promoting community solidarity. Next slide, please. A couple of days after the attack, a multi-faith service was held in Manchester Cathedral in the presence of Prince William. At this moving event shown live on TV, community leaders from across the city pledged to work together for peace, tolerance, a safer city, and an inclusive city. They all signed the "We Stand Together" proclamation, which became one of the core responses to the attack. A relentless push has taken place since then to help those directly affected by the attack, as well as working to bring our diverse city together. We also welcomed the many offers of support from around the world, including the Mayors for Peace, who we engage actively with. We have been determined to promote a positive vision of Manchester around the world. Next slide, please. A key part of the response to this attack, as part of promoting a safe and peaceful city, is ensuring we remember and do not forget all those affected by this incident in our city's history. Extensive work has taken place to conserve the messages and practical items of support which spontaneously took place after the attack. Plants, soft toys, and candles have been conserved or used in other positive ways, showing support for families affected by this tragedy. More objects will be kept in our city art gallery as a permanent reminder of responding to the events of the 22nd of May, 2017. Practical financial support was raised exceeding £20 million, and that's been given to those affected, primarily the bereaved families and the injured. Next slide, please. Every school in Manchester has developed some kind of peace education programme with peace trees and gardens, peace and anti-bullying assemblies, peace plans, and school committees. We've helped them, as well as with developing a children's city centre peace trail, which we've developed with Historic England, showing the story of peace and justice across our city. With our fellow Mayors for Peace executive city, Hiroshima, we have also worked with a number of Manchester schools and our 2 universities to encourage the planting of peace ginkgo trees and to understand the story behind peace and regeneration after the disaster. after disaster. Next year, Manchester has been recognised for that work by cooperating with the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Foundation on a festival of events, including teaching our children core human rights in a festival called Ripples of Hope. This is all part of our long-term commitment to Mayors for Peace as a Vice President and lead city. Next slide, please. Whilst we are keen to move on with promoting safe and peaceful cities, we think one part of that will be to have long-term reminders of what happened to our city. Next year, we'll see the formal opening of a long-term memorial to those who died on the 22nd of May, 2017. The Glade of Light Memorial will be centered on a white stone halo. You see a representation of it on the slide, including the names of those who died, with personalized memory capsules of tributes from their families. As a city, we've been actively involved in the ongoing public inquiry, which was delayed for various reasons, but is taking place at the moment. A public inquiry into what happened on the 22nd of May and if it could have been prevented. And the council is responding positively, taking part positively, and will respond positively to all of the inquiry's conclusions. As well as the Glade of Light Memorial, next year we'll see the opening of a new Manchester Peace Garden, centered on a statue to the advocate against the slave trade, Abraham Lincoln, where there's long historical links between Manchester, which supported the battle against slavery at that time in America. So there will be this peace garden around the statue of Abraham Lincoln, and there will also be some of our ginkgo peace trees from Hiroshima in that square. Next slide, please, last slide. So for most of you around Europe, you may know Manchester most from our successful football clubs, Manchester City and Manchester United. So one of the key messages of response to the arena attack was the slogan we call A City United. And it is on that basis that we will continue to promote safe, resilient, and more peaceful city. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Newman. I'd now like to invite our second speaker in this session of the webinar. It comes from a partner organisation we have recently engaged with and hope to engage with in the future, the Global Parliament of Mayors. Headquartered in the Dutch city of The Hague, the Global Parliament of Mayors has a vision in which elected mayors or council leaders, their town, cities and networks are equal partners in building global governance for an inclusive and sustainable world. The group works very much on initiatives to support the creation of safe and peaceful cities. And today we're delighted to welcome the Mayor of Braga from Portugal, Mayor Ricardo Rio, to talk to us today about their work. Mayor Rio is an executive member of the Global Parliament of Mayors and will explain some of their work now. Over to you, Mayor Rio.
Well, good morning. Thanks, first of all, for the invitation, Sean, and greetings to all the panelists, to all the ones that are following this seminar in this very important issue for the reality of our cities. I will start, before even mentioning the work of the Global Parliament of Mayors, by giving a more close example. As you mentioned, I'm the mayor of Braga, the third most important city in Portugal. And Braga is a city that has been acknowledged internationally as one of the cities with best quality of life. Even recently in the Eurobarometer, 97% of our residents said that they were happy to live in our city. And one of the critical dimensions for that happiness and for the attractiveness that the city has recorded in recent years has a lot to do with security, with providing a safe environment for people to live, to develop their projects, and obviously to bring their families for those that arrive as immigrants or people that move to the city. And obviously the security issue is a critical, even in a country like Portugal that on its own is one of the most peaceful in the world, as it has been also acknowledged in many international rankings. As for the Global Parliament of Mayors, you already mentioned, we are a network of cities. We believe that there's work that can be done together on, let's say, a parliamentary base in which every city, every mayor can have a voice in order to discuss issues that are challenges at the global level. And we have been producing many interventions in many domains. And one of the most recent interventions has precisely been on security issues, as I will mention in my intervention. Well, if you look at reality in the worldwide, we can assess that over 600,000 people are killed every year around the world in situations of conflict, much of it playing out in cities through extremism, crime, and interpersonal violence. If we look at the recent reality throughout the pandemic, we have diverse scenarios. There are cities in which the inside home violence has grown a lot against women, against children, against elderly people. But we also have other realities in which the violence in the street has grown because of the confinements and the more less controlled spaces, public spaces that we have recorded. As for the GPM, we had our General Assembly in Durban last year in 2019. And even by then, we assumed a public commitment in order to reduce 50% of the violence in our cities up until 2030. And that's in that context that we have recently, under the leadership of our dear colleague Marvin Rees from Bristol, in the UK, we have produced this resolution on reducing violence in cities, in which we are not alone, definitely. We have been working with many other international organizations. This is an issue that has a global expression, and we have been working with cities from all over the world, from Budapest, Madrid, Mannheim, to Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, Dayton, Santiago, Amman, Haifa, Rabat, Hebron, Cape Town, and also some other city organizations and international organizations like the Peace in Our Cities, the European Forum for Urban Security, the African Forum for Urban Security, the Mayors Migration Council, the Strong Cities Network, and even the UN's Conference of Mayors, which have also aligned in these initiatives that we have been developing. And one of the ideas that we have put forward throughout the work that led to this resolution that was presented in latest September to the Secretary General of the United Nations, to the Portuguese Antonio Guterres, was the idea that dealing with this, we are also contributing to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. In particular, the city-led resolution is and its objective to halt violence is part of the international campaign to accelerate action on the SDGs, and it commits city leaders to significantly reduce all forms of lethal violence in cities, invest in evidence-based solutions, work in partnerships with national and international organizations to focus on the most vulnerable communities, to empower survivors, like the greatest example that we just listened from Manchester, and also, obviously, to create a culture of peace within young people, breaking intergenerational cycles of violence, and obviously tackling with digital extremism. If we look at the content of this resolution that we presented, I won't read it, obviously, because it's available in the internet, but I have to enhance some critical ideas that that are included in this resolution. The first one is that it all starts with an individual commitment by cities. We begin by saying we, the cities, are committed to reduce violence in our cities by 50% up until 2030. Afterwards, we also obviously demand for support from the national governments. We require national governments to obviously finance, to adopt their policies in order to also value the initiatives that can be developed at the city level. The next step is obviously to also include international organizations. And we also, apart from the ones that I mentioned before, we also have been working with the UN Habitat and other international organizations that also are focused in this type of issues. Also, the dimension of partnerships, because we don't believe that this is a matter of public authorities. We believe that we have to establish partnerships with other sectors in each of our territories, in each of our communities, and we have to deal with responsibles in the field of criminal justice, with health provisions, with education, with social protection systems, and even with economic development, because it obviously requires a good environment so that the communities are more prosperous and the risks are diminished in each of its contexts. Also, the engagement of the communities, of the citizens. We believe that we need to provide, obviously, the better conditions for the whole community, but each of the citizens has this necessity to also align in the idea of promoting peace, and also to have platforms in which we can exchange experiences, enhance best practices in each of the communities, and obviously allow citizens and their representatives or several types of organizations to participate in the projects that we developed. On that basis, we believe that the outcome will be an integrated action and transversal, because it not only complements several dimensions, but also has a global approach. We will develop strategies to tackle the interrelated nature of different forms of violence, rather than treating them as isolated issues. We will focus on areas, the most vulnerable parts of the cities, and obviously we have to acknowledge that in urban areas, there are areas that have unequal levels of development, and we have to try to promote the inner cohesion of the cities. And also in relation to gender, to young people, and to poverty, where levels of violence are highest, working to achieve rapid increases in safety and security. This is to say that it's not about a diagnosis, it's also about a plan that aims to achieve quick results so that we can accomplish the global target of reducing violence up until 2030 by 50%. Let's say the public that we are targeting is all sorts of intervention, but I think that one critical element is precisely, as we mentioned in this resolution, to break the intergenerational cycles of violence, in particular by confronting violence against children and young people at home, in schools, in communities, and online, which is also a new dimension, but a very important dimension in this problem that we are dealing. And finally, and this is why Marvin and all the members from GPM and our partner institutions has presented this document to the United Nations, we are talking about a matter that concerns with human rights at the highest level of the global commitment. And therefore, we also urge cities to pursue this public safety issue, but together with the United Nations initiatives. And in particular, we support the United Nations system of wide guidelines on safer cities and human settlements, and encourage their adoption by all of the cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Rio. Very, very illuminating. So we've got a little time for questions and the panel discussion. I'd also like, if possible, I think that Mayor Borgen is still on the call. We've still got two Tirasto on the call as well. There is a couple other questions that I might ask towards the end. But my first question is to you, Mayor Rio. How can the Mayors for Peace work in partnership with you on promoting safe and resilient cities? Is the first part of the question. And the second part is how do local authorities punch above their weight at an international level? You know, what is the role of the Global Parliament and mayors in doing that sort of process? Because that's, again, the same sort of thing that the Mayors for Peace wish to do, and I'm very interested to know techniques you've learned and developed that have made you listened to by national and international agencies as well.
I believe that the critical element for the voice of cities and their organizations to be heard internationally is by leading by example. If we can demonstrate that we are recording best practices in each of our territories, and these are leading to results, obviously we have the ability to, in a sense, show the way. That is this sharing of experiences, this alignment of strategies, because and that's one of the very curious issues in the Global Parliament of Mayors. We are talking about cities that are very different within the reality. When I compare Braga with Los Angeles, we are talking about a totally different reality. Braga and Amman is a completely different reality. But the crucial element is that even within each of our contexts, we also share some concerns. We also share some areas that have to be dealt with in the same way, in the sense that we can learn from each other. And this, as we show that the actions that we are developing produce results, obviously, if we collect all these good examples and make it a common strategy that is shared by cities and by other organizations that represent territorial dimensions, obviously we can empower ourselves and ask for a voice and for other support, either at national government level or at the international level. For instance, in Europe, we are always asking for a stronger voice of cities at the European level, and even at the international organizations like the United Nations.
Thank you. And a question for Councillor Newman that's come in. What is the importance of peace education? How do we ensure the next generation of children are fully engaged in a more peaceful way than some of their previous generations? And what, again, this is also for Mayor Rio, after Mayor Newman, there's a lot to talk about intergenerational violence. How do we develop peace education programs for children, but also for older people, that reduces violence and reduces the threat of violence as well in our towns and cities? The first, Mayor Newman, could you answer that question, please?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Yeah, difficult question. As I explained in the presentation, Manchester has been for many years, and particularly in the last few years, has been promoting peace education in our schools. And whether it's things such as the Peace Trail in the city centre, where there are different landmarks that talk about peace and human rights development in the city, that we encourage groups of school students to go on that trail, but more in the actual schools themselves, in the classes. We try and assist as much as possible the teachers, because in the end, the education in the schools is not going to be done by the city council, it's going to be done by the teachers. And in some cases, older students as well. And so there's a whole variety of ways that are not unique to Manchester, where promotion of peace is discussed in schools, and it's got to be relevant to the particular age of the youngsters. You can talk to very young children about peace. You obviously don't want to say things that frighten them, but you can talk about the need to cooperate together, and it's those issues of cooperation, of not as basic as with a young child. You don't hit each other. If you disagree with each other, you try and talk about it, or else if you've got a problem you can't resolve, you go to someone, a teacher or a parent or someone who may be able to help. So it's that promotion, discouragement of violence, promotion of peaceful discussion. And obviously, as the children are older, and you can look at international issues, you can look at things like nuclear weapons, you then try and promote discussion to show the importance of cooperation. And Manchester tries to explain its history as a city of peace. So I don't think these things are unique to Manchester, but this is what we try and do, and it's not easy. And of course, you can do lots of stuff outside schools, both with young people and with older people. And the faith communities are very important as well. You know, we have lots of different faith communities that have a strong influence in Manchester. And one of the reasons why we were able to get such a strong, united response of solidarity with people in response to the attack was because we built up relationships as civic leaders with the leaders of the different faith communities, and they had relationships between themselves. And that kind of cooperation in promoting peace and you know, everyone's not going to agree with each other, particularly say if you've got a religion, you're not going to agree with the tenets of another particular religion. It's self-evident, but we can all agree that we want a peaceful society and that violence is not a way of dealing with any conflicts there are, that we need discussion and dialogue and that kind of thing. So at all levels of ages, we can promote peaceful dialogue as opposed to conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. So Maria, I was wondering as well, you mentioned the issues of how we try to break intergenerational elements of violence and also gender-based violence, domestic violence. Other programs the Global Parliament of Mayors is promoting and encouraging as part of the move to reduce violence by 50% over the next decade?
Well, talking about the education for peace that you posed the question, I think that it's not only about a matter of content, because we obviously can develop educational contents and initiatives in order to reinforce the civical conscience of the youngsters so that they are aware of the need of promoting more security, more peaceful communities, and the several dimensions that this has involved. But I think that the best impact comes from zero tolerance to certain types of situations. When we have, for instance, kids at the school suffering from bullying, or when we have families that obviously have awkward behaviors towards their children, towards the wives or men considering the situations, or to the elderly people, what we have to have is to impose a zero tolerance practice, so that we don't ever admit that this is even considered normal by anyone. And when we are talking about youngsters, there's one issue that it has been involved in many campaigns at the national level. For instance, is violence in dating. When youngsters are still dating, the violence between the girl and the boy. And these are the types of things that it starts in the seeds. If you cut it off right from the start, obviously we will not accept this type of conduct when people are married or when they are living together. And also, I think that apart from the initiatives that we can develop in the educational context, we also have to work with the communities outside of the schools. And here in Braga, we are developing a lot of projects together with associations and other institutions, social institutions, for instance, that are working within the communities to try to show people that they can have a brighter future and that they can contribute to having that brighter future. And I think that this type of engagement is a critical element to reduce the risks of violence within these communities.
Thank you. And now a sort of question for both of you. Obviously, we're in the worst global health pandemic that we've probably seen in our lifetime, and why we have positive vaccines coming on board, and maybe within the next 4 to 6 months we may see some progress. We also know that the economic consequences of COVID are here for not just next year, but potentially for many years to come, really, recovering from this, really. The economic issues are likely to create social issues, deep poverty, issues around violence, and issues around economies just functioning properly. So what should be the response if we're trying to develop safe and resilient cities and peaceful cities to the economic challenges that COVID will have on the social fabric of our towns and cities, really. If I could ask that first to Eddie and then to Mario.
Yeah, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, I mean, it's quite clear that with the coronavirus pandemic crisis that there's a lot more things that are affecting people than the acute health crisis of the actual pandemic, of the chance of catching COVID and then getting seriously ill and some people sadly dying. And that in itself is the largest part of this crisis, but clearly connected to it are all the economic and social issues. I mean, I was struck by Mario referring to domestic violence at homes and also between young people in relationships. The confinement of people to being asked to stay at home as an issue. I mean, I know there's a phrase saying that domestic violence doesn't wear a mask. The point being that there are quite a significant number of women usually, but of people in relationships who are confined at home who don't see any way of escaping because they're expected to stay at home, unless they're involved in some sort of work that takes them out of the home. So the whole issue so that's an immediate impact on the day-to-day level of the pandemic and of the measures to try and defeat the pandemic. But clearly the economic impact, huge numbers of people being thrown into unemployment, the number of people who will be evicted from their rented homes over the coming period. There's just the fact that young people who had difficulties in looking for their future prior to the pandemic because of economic circumstances find that situation even greater. All these pressures that are on people clearly are going to create further tensions. And there's also the possibilities of people with malign intent, political groups with malign intent, trying to stir up trouble in this situation, set communities against each other, blaming this or that community for the virus or the consequences of the virus. These are all the tensions that have always existed. And in our cities where people by their nature live together in concentrated populations, that has opportunities, but it also has dangers and difficulties, and they are made greater by the consequences of the pandemic. So our response to it has to be that much greater, and to realize that we're not just dealing with a crisis of the health of COVID, we're dealing with mental health crisis, and we're dealing with plenty of other crises that are not specifically health, but are linked to this extraordinary situation that we're in. So we have there's all sorts of threats, but where there are threats, there are opportunities. So it's very important, to finish off, it's very important, I think, for civic leaders who are often closer, city leaders, councillors, mayors, and so on, who are often closer to the population than national governments, to step up to the mark, as I think they are in many cases, and to give leadership to help people, and also to pressure national governments to provide the resources to allow local councils to intervene effectively in this situation. Thank you.
And Mario, how is the Braga responding and Portugal responding to the?
Well, I'll start by saying, obviously, that the connection between the economic development and security, or on a reverse proportion to criminality and obviously to sources of insecurity, are obviously directly related. If we have less economic development, if we have more unemployment, if we have more people with difficult social situations, obviously the security will be lower as well. So and that's not something that arises from the pandemic. It's a general regression in a sense. And the pandemic also brings this type of situation. And obviously, if some businesses are not managing to operate, are not succeeding, people are being sent to unemployment, this obviously creates some tension in terms of the security of each of the communities. And obviously, what we have to do is to try to foster the resilience and obviously the recovery of the economic sectors. But there are two dimensions that I think that are very circumscribed to the pandemic reality. And the first one is the, let's say, the inequality effect, because the impact of the pandemic is diverse in the different publics. For instance, we were talking about education. Many students were forced to go home and to study on a digital basis. Well, the learning conditions of each of the families are obviously different, and we have to try to assure that we provide as equal conditions to everybody as possible, even if we are obviously dealing with a huge challenge to achieve that. And that's a asymmetric impact that happens in the education and in other areas. It's a crucial element of the pandemic on its own. The third, and I think one very important issue, is the mental health, because apart from the economic response, there's the tension that arises from the pandemic, the anxiety that the pandemic causes on people, obviously the different situations that they have to deal in their daily routines that are another factor of risk for the life in our communities, and obviously are a challenge in terms of security. And I think that dealing also with the mental health of the population as a whole and of specific groups in particular is an important issue for local authorities as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Mario. I think we're closing in on the end of our webinar now. I'd like to thank you and Lord Mayor Newman. I very sincerely hope that the Mayors for Peace and the Global Parliament of Mayors can engage further on these issues, work together, work in partnership, look at ways we can work together as well on resolutions and so forth. We supported very recently the global resolution on violence that was passed through. Both Manchester and Grenouillairs supported it directly as well. And I would like to thank you for your time today. I know the mayors across Europe dealing with COVID is one of the biggest challenges you've probably ever had. I'd like to sort of end the webinar now by bringing in the Vice President of Mayors for Peace, our own Lord Mayor of Manchester, Councillor Tommy Judge, to make some closing comments on the webinar and some closing comments in general, really. So over to you, Mayor, Lord Mayor Tommy Judge.
Thank you very much, Sean. Hello, everyone. I am honoured and delighted to be with you all today. As Lord Mayor of Manchester, a proud Vice President of Mayors for Peace and Vice Chair of the European Chapter, I'm delighted to be able to formally close this joint webinar of the chapter with the NFLA and ICAN. We have heard some fascinating thoughts from leading European mayors, security experts, and ICAN senior staff. It has been truly enlightening. Manchester has a long-standing member of Mayors for Peace, and as we heard this morning, is a city that has worked tirelessly.
Sorry, Lord Mayor, could you put your video on, please? Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll start again, Sean. Thank you very much, Sean. Hello, everybody. I am honoured and delighted to be with you all today. As Lord Mayor of Manchester, a proud Vice President of Mayors for Peace and Vice Chair of its European Chapter, I am delighted to be able to formally close this joint webinar of the chapter with the NFLA and ICAN. We have heard some fascinating thoughts from leading European mayors, security experts, and ICAN senior staff, and it has been truly enlightening. Manchester has been a long-standing member of Mayors for Peace, and as you have heard this morning, is a city that has worked tirelessly for bringing our communities together in a spirit of harmony and solidarity. This year has been like no other, as we have all had to deal with a global public health pandemic. This has shown how fragile our world can be, and it has also shown how we depend so much on working together for our health and safety. Last month, Manchester City Council commemorated 40th anniversary of its famous nuclear weapons-free city resolution. With the city of Grenoble, we were the first European cities to pass resolutions in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We were very proud to have done so. In the city where the atom was first split, we have been at the centre of an international movement that seeks to stop any further use of nuclear weapons that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You have also heard today how much developing safe, resilient, and more peaceful cities means to us, as well as to the awful terrorist attack on our own city on the 22nd of May 2017. As part of a country that is leaving the European Union, Manchester wants to play a full part of the Mayors for Peace European chapter, as we know we'll have to work closely and in solidarity with our friends across Europe. We are delighted the European chapter has held its first major event today, and may it be the first of many. On behalf of the chapter, I would like to thank all the speakers at today's webinar. Of all the mayors who have taken time out of their busy diaries to talk to us today, of those who have worked together to bring this webinar together, our Manchester officer, Sean Morris, Helen Evander from Grenobles, and Daniel Hogster from ICAN. We thank the IT staff in Grenobles and the translators for their hard work. We also thank the Provisional Council of Barcelona for supporting this webinar and in getting the European chapter moving with some funding. And above all, for all of you who have attended and engaged in the webinar, I hope the chapter will go from strength to strength. I hope ICAN and Mayors for Peace and the NFLA can continue to work for global nuclear disarmament. This pandemic has shown the need for peace. Let us all work together for that wonderful goal. Thank you all, and I wish you a very pleasant weekend.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I would also like to personally thank all the speakers today. I think the event has gone remarkably smoothly with little technical issues, which is very impressive in this day and age. And for myself and for Helena and Daniel that put this programme together, thank you very much for all those who are engaged in it. We will be putting all the presentations out to attendees. We'll also put a recording of the webinar onto a YouTube video and share it online. We'll send it all to you by email shortly. And as the Lord Mayor just said, this will be the first of many webinars and other events. Hopefully, we may be able to hold some live next year. And we'll also certainly be hoping to engage with Hiroshima for the Executive and General Conference of Mayors of Peace, which will be in August, as well as engaging the MPT, the State Parties Conference for the TPNW and other relevant events. So thank you very much for all of your time. It's been a long morning, but hopefully productive morning, and we do wish you very well for the weekend, and I'll have a happy Christmas or a good winter solstice, however you wish to celebrate it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.